Right. Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Looks like we're on. So welcome to today's webinar on using open data to source labor market information. My name is Katya and I will be the entertainment for this morning. Hi, couple of housekeeping notices before we start. I don't know how many of you have done this before, but we've just, I've got the lovely Lucy from Complete Careers helping me record this session, and she's also helping me manage it. So I think we'll keep our microphones off so that we can reduce the feedback loop. If you have any questions, there's, I think the program is, I'm going to speak for the first 30 minutes and then we have 15 minutes at the end for any questions or follow-ups, and we'll be using the chat function for that. So hopefully all of that makes sense. And also all of the slides will be made available to you as well as a recording of this session. So if there's any part of this talk that you would like to go through or rewind or discuss in further detail after the fact, then don't worry, everything's going to be made available to you at the end. And I will also be making my own email available to you if you would like to follow up with any discussions or conversations. So hope all of that makes sense. If there's no additional questions or comments or concerns before we get started, I'll just share my screen with you and crack on. No comments in the chat, so I'm guessing that means we can carry on. So, let's get started. So, quick session overview for today. Oh, wait, that's not working. Okay, so quick session overview for today. I'm going to start by giving you a run through what open data is to begin with, and what the difference is between open data versus big data, because in my experience, that's one of the first things that people get hung up about a lot, and it's one of the things that people get the most, people have the most questions on. After that, I will show you a few places where I like to look for open data and where you may look for open data specifically for careers and labor market information. And then finally, because I know that NOMIS is one of those things that people have a lot of questions and concerns about, I'm going to show you a couple of ways in which I make it work for myself. And hopefully that will give you some inspiration to give it a go and have a go at it yourself and make it work for you, because it is one of the biggest, most comprehensive resources that you can possibly access for free. And my view is that it's one that we should be making more use of on a day-to-day basis. Just to reiterate, there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you are confused about any aspect of this presentation, chances are you're not the only one. So please, please, please make sure to ask the question at the end so that we can cover as much as possible in this session while we're all here together. So without further ado, a couple of things about Lauric, in case you haven't heard of us before. The Lincolnshire Open Research and Innovation Centre was founded in 2017. We are part of Bishop Gustest University, and we were part funded by the ERDF until June of 2019. We were created to support local enterprises with data-driven consultancy. And we do that by using open data to help people innovate, create new products and services, or just to work more efficiently with the data that they already have in their companies. We are very, very big on open data because we think it's a great tool for transparency. And it's a great tool for leveling up the playing field, because obviously most small and medium enterprises in Lincolnshire can't afford to hire a big consultancy to support them with data. So what we offer is a very specific service, and we use open data a lot in our day-to-day work. Hence why this session hence why we've been invited to do the session. So what is open data? In a way, it's basically what it says on the tin. It's data that's available for anybody to use for all purposes, including commercial. This is one of the things that people get tripped up about a lot. People assume that if data is made public, then that means it's free and you can do whatever you want with it. That's not true. For a data set to be open, it has to be published under an open data license, and I will tell you a little bit more about what that is in a second. It's data that is available for you to access easily. So if you have to input a password, your credit card number, or give away your firstborn for it, it's not open data. And it's also data that is readable by both humans and machines. So it can be processed either way. That's what it is in a nutshell. Now, of course, people get hung up about a couple of things. The first of them being the question of intellectual property. So back to what I was saying earlier, even if something is made public on the internet, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's open data. Even if you publish something on a social media website or on a social media platform and you haven't set your settings on private, you still own the intellectual property on whatever it is that you're posting. And that's not open data. And I have to say this because I have lost count of the number of people who seem to think that it's appropriate to scrape social media websites and call that open data usage. I honestly am kind of surprised that this is still happening. The second key challenge when we're trying to work with open data is the question of privacy. And that's not so much a challenge as it is an ethical gray area. So you may own a data set, which pertains to, say, people's car records or people's health data. You may own that data set, you may have the intellectual property to it, and you may decide, yeah, let's put it out on the internet, which is fine, you can do that. However, you have to be aware of the fact that by publishing this data set, you may be accidentally revealing information about people's private lives. When we talk about when I talk about people's private information, people assume we mean things like telephone numbers and names. Well, actually, sometimes the data set can inadvertently show people's private information by virtue of it being very small or by virtue of it pertaining to a small number of people. So what usually happens then is that the data set can be made open, but it's ethically not a good idea. The reason why I'm saying this is that when you go on an open data repository and you try to get open data pertaining to the labor market, you may sometimes find things becoming automatically anonymized after a certain point. And that's because for whatever reason, the rules of the website have been set in a way to protect people's private data. So if a data set is very small, it may look like it does not exist, or certain fields may not exist on the spreadsheet that you're downloading. And that's to protect people's private information. So I hope this is making sense. When I talk about open data, I'm talking about things like ONS data, the census, company's house, anything that you can download from Nomis. Some cat pictures from the internet, but not always, which is, a fine thing of itself. Open data can be big, and big data can be made open, but the two things are not synonymous with each other. Big data, by definition, is big. It's got a lot of volume, it's got a lot of velocity, it's something that is constantly being updated. So a lot of social media data is big, and the very appropriately named Twitter fire hose is one of those examples. However, open data is not automatically big, and big data is not automatically open. And this is very important, again, if, for example, you're working with a student and they've got a very brilliant idea about an app and they want to use social media data for it, you may want to flag up with them that just because it's big data and it's available does not necessarily mean that it's open. I've got the definitions on the screen now. Feel free to go through them in your own good time. But again, open data is data that is specifically, explicitly made available under an open data license. And there's a spectrum to that. The Open Data Institute, which is a nonprofit that specifically works around the publication of open data, has made available this graph, which details the data spectrum. So as you can see here, the more private the information is, the more closed it is. So the more steps you have to go through to access an information like sales reports or employment contracts and policies, the more closed that data set is by definition. Open data tends to be something that's very generic. It very rarely pertains to private records and private information. The only exception to that is things that, like for example, the contact information of your MP, which has to be made available to you because they are required by law to be contactable by their constituents. And that's one of the few examples where open data, which is also private, is open. But you can have small, medium, and big data sets of any kind, and it can be personal, commercial, and government data of any kind. So this over here is a good illustration of the data spectrum. Now, over here on this end of the screen, you can see the copyright license. So this is Creative Commons with attribution. So I am allowed to use this particular graph. I can use it for any purpose that I see fit. I can remix it. I can reuse it, so long as I give appropriate attribution. So when I tell you I got this from the Open Data Institute, that's an example of Creative Commons with attribution. So I'm showing something to you, I'm using it for a very specific purpose, and I am sharing it with you, and I'm telling you where I got it from. That's an example of open data, and that's just one graph. Other examples of licenses, if you go on any government website, you will either see Open Government License 3 or OGL 3 or Crown Copyright. These are two open data licenses that you will see very often on government websites. And again, they tell you that this is available for you to download and use for any purpose. Now, if you're using open data for educational purposes, you also have a little bit more leeway. So you also have what is called fair use. So if you are using a piece of data or piece of research or some information for the purpose of education, then you've got a little bit more leeway in terms of using something. But if you are having to use data to create a new product or service and then you're going to charge money for it, you need to make sure that it's either open data, so it's free to use for commercial purposes, or you have bought the license from the person who owns the intellectual copyright. And this is important because if you create a multi-million-dollar app and you sell it for a lot of money and you use someone else's intellectual property for it, that person can then come for you and demand a cut of your profits, which, depending on the cost of the product or service, can be quite significant. So that's a very, very quick whistle-stop tour, and I appreciate that I'm going at 100 miles per hour right now. I'm going to show you some examples of open data now on some places where I go for open data on the internet. So one of the, excuse me, I'm just looking at some of the comments on the chat. All right, okay, so these are some of the examples. I'm going to show you on the on my screen now some of the places where I would go for accessing open data. The first one, the most obvious one, is data.gov.uk, which is an aggregate site. And this is one of the places where you can get data from multiple publishers and multiple government agencies. And this is a very good place to start if you don't know where else to go. So you can either search by category over here, if you're looking for a very specific kind of data, or you can search by keyword. So if I put in employment for you now, you get about 763 results, which is not bad. You can also sort by the type of license. You can sort by format, and you can also sort by publisher. So if I look for something for Lincolnshire, for example, type in Lincolnshire County Council, and I apply my filters, you then get 3 different data sets that have been made available. Some county councils are better at this than others. Some are far more transparent than others. We're quite lucky in that our county council is making a lot of data open already, and we also have our own local repository that you can go to. So if you downloaded, if you clicked on this and you read through it, you will see the summary, you will see the description, you will see the date on which it was uploaded, and then you will have a link to the data. Now, I've downloaded this prior to getting started. If you went through the download, you would get something like this. Obviously not very sexy looking. It's basically a spreadsheet, and it's actually not that brilliant to look at. However, what you can then do is you can sort and filter it and you can make it more useful for you. So for example, over here, you can pick the geographic name. If you're looking for a specific area within Lincolnshire, for example, let's say we go to Alford. You sort through that and you can see how many people are employed, or rather were employed in the year 2019 in each of the main categories of industry. So for agriculture, forestry, and fishing, it was just 10 people. For mining, quarrying, and other utilities, it was none, or maybe they anonymized the data, I don't know. You can see which industries were the most represented in this particular constituency, and you can also look at percentage of the whole. So that's quite good because it's doing a lot of the work for you. You can have a play on Excel. You can work with presenting that data in a way that makes more sense, so that when you're showing it to your students, you can then make it even more legible. But when you're looking at the raw data that you can download, oftentimes it looks something like this. And this is one of the areas where people get tripped up a lot when we talk about open data. They assume that just because it doesn't look very good, it's not useful. The fact of the matter is, a lot of these publishers who put open data out there, they're trying to put it in a format that the most people can use, so that if you are trying to answer a very specific question, you can just query the data and you can make it more useful for you. Now, that's not always beginner friendly, and this is where we have to be a little patient with ourselves, but it's very important to bear that in mind, because one of the reasons why we have open data in the first place is because it helps with transparency. It helps us with understanding where people are coming from. A lot of the people who publish things on, say, data.gov.uk publish things as a response to a freedom of information request, or they publish it as a way to show the expenditure of a local council and how money is being spent. So it's quite interesting. But again, you need to know exactly what you're looking for and what you're trying to do in order to make that work for you. I mentioned that our local county council has a couple of repositories, one of them being the Lincolnshire Research Observatory. This one is quite useful because in addition to the data itself, you can also access reports. So you can actually go and download things like this, where we've got the briefings, we've got the data analyzed for us, and we can extract the data that is relevant to us and how we can present it to our students, which is quite good. Some areas of the Lincolnshire Research Observatory have been uploaded more recently than others. You can see here, this one has been updated in July 2019. We've got the 2020 briefing from January as well, which is quite good. We've also got Companies House, which is a government service where you can look for specific company information. So if you were looking for a specific company and you wanted to learn more about them, all you have to do is type in their name and you will probably get their information from there, which is quite useful if you want to show people how they can, again, search public records, see if the company has any outstanding lawsuits against them, who is on the board. And this is quite good if you're trying to research a potential employer, which, you know, makes people more informed job seekers and more informed job applicants. Lauric also has its own open data repository. This is our CCAN website, and we use this to put some data, which is data from Companies House and NOMIS, which we have used for previous projects and we have transformed already into a slightly more user-friendly version. And you can search for that by looking through the data sets or just searching directly into the search tab. We also use it to put in some things that we have created ourselves. So recently I did a workshop on children and social media. I put in the reports and the toolkits that we've developed as part of that workshop over here, which again makes it more easy for people to access that data and analyze that data. So these are just a few examples. I would strongly encourage you to go and have a look through them yourselves. Let me just check the chat really quickly. So yeah, data is updated on various, so the question of how often that data is updated it varies from publisher to publisher. Some publishers are more diligent than others. Some people are less diligent than others. Unfortunately, a lot of it does depend on who is put in charge of publishing open data for each individual council or for each individual worker or each individual company. So every time I look for open data, I try to look at also the last published data set so that I know that I'm comparing apples to apples, basically. ONS is quite good for publishing data frequently. But if you really do want the raw, most up-to-date data, they use NOMIS for that. And NOMIS is known for not being very beginner-friendly. And I'm going to have to ask you to hear me out on this. This is a beta site. This is a beta version that's been created by the University of Durham for the Office of National Statistics, and it's basically the most frequently updated repository for labor market data in the UK. Sometimes that data has been also transformed into area reports, which you can download directly and just go through with your students and discuss. Sometimes that data is just published as raw data, and then you have to go through the additional steps of transforming it and then discussing it with your students. So if you want reports, you go on this area and you can sort it by basically whatever it is whatever geographic area you want to look at. We can go by areas, local authority, local enterprise partnerships. The 2011 ward profiles are quite good if you're looking at a very small area. So if you just want your local area, that's one way to go about it. So for example, if I go to the ward profiles and I type in Mablethorpe, for an example, that will then give me, hopefully, all of the areas where Mablethorpe is mentioned. So if I go to Mablethorpe Central, that will give me the report for that specific geographic area, and that's a very small area. That will give me the resident population, the labor supply, and the out-of-work benefits. This is good because it automatically calculates your percentages, and it compares them against the rest of the county, and it compares them against the rest of England. However, and this is very important, the data used for very small areas comes from the 2011 census. So obviously some of that has not been updated for quite some time. So population of working age, that's been from 2013. Labor supply, that's from 2011, which again has been a while since that's been updated, and it won't be updated again until the next census, which will be in 2021. The most up-to-date thing here will be the benefits, specifically out-of-work benefits, so claimant counts and claimant counts by age. So if you're looking at a very small geographic area, you're going to have to take into account, you're going to have to account for the fact that some of this data has not been updated for quite some time. You can make some educated guesses. So for example, if you know how the population of the rest of the county has grown over time, you can then apply those percentages to the data over here, and then you can get some you can make an educated guess about what the current status of that is. Or what you can do is you can go to the labor market profile of the local authority. So I've chosen local enterprise partnerships. And again, I search for Lincolnshire, and I can find the LEP, and I can look at the labor market profile for Greater Lincolnshire. Or you can look at it by county, which again is fine. This one has been updated more recently. This one we've got 2018, 2019 as well. So this is for the labor supply. And again, you can see here the percentages have been calculated for the whole of the county, and then also for the East Midlands and Great Britain. So if you want to do a comparison and you want to see whether or not a certain level of economic activity or inactivity is, I don't want to say normal, but seems to be in line with the rest of the country, you can do so quite easily from here. So this one gives you a lot more detail as well. So you not only have labor supply, you also get workless households, employment by occupation, which is quite useful if you want to give people an idea about where the most jobs are, basically, what the qualifications are, what the average weekly pay is as well for full-time workers and part-time workers, and how it compares to the rest of the country. You can look at the out-of-work benefits. That was updated basically 2 months ago, which is quite recent. And I do believe Do we have reasons for being unemployed? We do have working age client groups, main benefit claimants, not seasonally adjusted. That's quite old, actually. That's from 2016. But you do have job density and you do have employee jobs, which is quite good. And again, one of the things that I like about this particular function of Nomis is you get all of this information and you can also download it directly or print it off as PDF. So there's very little faffing about that's going on in this area. So if you're not feeling confident about digging through or querying the data yourself, you can absolutely access it in this way and then go from there. If you're feeling a little bit more adventurous, then you can go straight to the data sources and then query those. So some of them, again, have been uploaded more recently than others. The annual population survey is one of the most frequently updated ones. DWP benefits and job seekers allowance, not so much. So the DWP is slowly migrating their data to Stat Explorer. And that's where most universal credit data is going to go. Unfortunately, the last time I checked, it hadn't been updated yet, so there wasn't a lot of useful information at present. However, if you want to look at historic information, you can still go to Nomis, you can still look on these areas over here, and you can still say, okay, we know this is the 5-year trend that we're seeing from the data here. This is what it tells us. This is what we know about people being out of work. And this is what we know about people seeking benefits, which is quite useful. I know I'm going really quickly. I'm really conscious of time. I'm just going to show you over here. If I wanted to query the annual population survey, you click through here. Click on query the data, and then you can start a manual query. So on this area, you basically select your geography. You can either pick from a list, or what I do is I just pick, I just search. So if I wanted to know more about Tetney, it's not going to give me about Tetney. It's going to give me some options over here about parliamentary constituencies, local authorities, regions, depending on how far I want to go into the data. I'm going to select Louth and Horncastle just for the sake of this example. We select our dates. Just going to pick 12 months to December, although you can go as far as 2004 on this data set if you want historic data. And then you select your variables. So if you want to know, for example, your economic activity by age, you can absolutely do that. And you can have the options of selecting many different options. Again, for the sake of example, I know I'm rushing. I'll just select everyone 16 or over. And then you hit your download data. If it's going to work, what will happen then is Nomis will extract the data from the larger data set. My advice to you would be not to try and get too much all at once, because then it just gets confused. I do a quick share screen. Where am I at? No, that's not it. 1 second. Share. There we go. So that should be what the data looks like when you first download it. Not very exciting, but you can have a play with it. You can arrange it. You can take away the division by gender, and you can just look at all people. One thing I do need to let you know about is that Nomis has a funny way of downloading the data. So all people is the combination of economically active and economically inactive people. Economically active people is the combination of people in employment and the unemployed. And amongst those who are in employment, it also divides by employees and self-employed. So that usually leads to a bit of confusion when people try to analyze this particular data set. And that's just because of the way that the ONS is counting economic activity versus economic inactivity. This could be a good opportunity for you to explain to your students the difference of the two. And if you want to explain to them, for example, how unemployment stats are being derived, you can explain to them that we're only counting people who are looking for work, not the people who are discouraged for any reason. You can also talk to them about the difference between being self-employed and an employee, which is, again, it can be a good starting point for a lesson, especially if you're trying to tell people about how do we use data in our day-to-day lives, how do we use any kind of data in our day-to-day lives. I'm conscious that I'm at the end of my time, so I'm just going to show you something that I have done using, again, data from Nomis. This is from an old presentation of mine. And again, I downloaded this data off the annual workforce survey. This is just the number of people who were employed at various positions, and I just rearranged the table to make it more legible for myself. This is just raw data. If you flip it into percentage points, that gives you a little bit more clarity, and you can discuss this then with your students. So for example, if you want to talk about part-time workers, and you can see in which occupations they're most frequently employed, that's a good way to get started. Self-employed data, I use the same kind of method over here. If you wanted to talk about self-employment versus employment and which areas people seem to be the most employed in, this is the data for the East Midlands. Flexibility, other flexibility, if you wanted to discuss with people casual contracts, this is the stats for the East Midlands. Actually, Nomis anonymized the data for male workers who are on these kinds of contracts. So you can use that to discuss gendered occupation with people. This is an example of JSA off-flows of a particular area in the UK, and this can show you the 5-year view of that. And it can also show you the 5-year view of different occupations. So you can see over here, people in sales and customer service occupations followed a very specific pattern of joining the job seekers allowance and then off-flowing from the job seekers allowance. So this shows us an indication that, for example, in this area, people were probably working with a kind of, this was an area where the visitor economy was quite prominent. So it actually shows that seasonal labor is something that's quite, not normal, but quite accepted for this area of the country. I know that was really, really whistle stop. I appreciate this was not the most comprehensive view, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to go through your questions now. And let's see as far as I can go. So again, labor market information is available at many places. I would start with data.gov.uk because it's a good catch-all repository, and then depending on what you can see which agency or which local council publishes the most data sets. That's usually an indication that people are on the ball there. Another indication that people are on the ball is having frequent and recent data sets being published, and not just a quick burst of information at some point during the day or some point during the last 5 years when they had someone very enthusiastic joining them. So that's a good indication about a reliable source of data. And again, putting that into a format that makes sense for your students will depend on what the raw data looks like when you download it and how useful it is and what kind of questions you're looking to answer. So if you're looking to answer a very specific question, I would say have a play with your search terms, because it may be very easy to find or it may be quite well hidden. The Office of National Statistics is quite good because it gives you the statistical release, it gives you the raw data, and it gives you the explanation. So it's a good starting point as well. And again, you can use it in your lessons to discuss with your students and have them ask questions about what's the stuff that gives them the most, what are the things that give them the most problems? What are the things that gives them, that they understand and that they don't understand? Yeah, the worldofwork.co.uk is a good place to look for data, absolutely. How often is the data updated? Again, this varies a lot from publisher to publisher, and every single company and every single county council will have a different policy to that. So definitely check the publishers themselves. Yeah, the current situation with COVID-19 is an interesting one. A lot of the data that we are looking at now, the historic data, is going to look vastly different this time next year, and it will be because of COVID. One way you can use actually open data to spark discussion with your students is if you look at some of those graphs that I showed you about job seeker allowance offlows and onflows, you can use that and you can have your students talk about what could cause these spikes and those seasonal spikes. So if you look at a 5-year view or a 10-year view of the data, and you tell your students, okay, it looks like a lot of people in sales occupations go on job seekers allowance in September, and then they go off that benefit in May. What do you think might cause that? And it could be a very good discussion about using data to locate trends. You can then ask students, how do you think COVID is going to impact a lot of these different occupations? Do you think people in management occupations are going to have a different graph than the people in service occupations? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of it will depend on the area that you're looking at. So if you're looking at an area where the visitor economy is actually contributing a large portion of income to the overall economy of the place, then people working in those jobs are going to be overrepresented versus in an area where it's more industrial in nature. So it could be quite useful in that regard. Other questions? Okay, well, there doesn't seem to be that many questions in the actual chat. We've got 10 more minutes. Does anybody else have anything in particular that they want to discuss or an angle that they want to go through? I appreciate that this was, again, whistle-stop tour. I get really excited about data, as you can tell. Right, there's not really much else in here. Like I said, the slides are going to be made available to everybody after the session, as well as this recording. If I just share my last screen with you, So this is my email address. If you have any further questions or comments or concerns and you want to, or you have any further questions after this slideshow is over, please feel free to get in touch. It's just my name at bishopg.ac.uk. And you can also check us out at bishopg.ac.uk/Lauric. We've got a lot more information on our own website there. So unless we've got any further questions, I guess that will be it. Okay, given the current situation and the huge changes to the labor market, when will this be reflected in the stats? That's a good question. Now, a lot of it will depend. The annual workforce survey gets updated every single year. So in fact, the annual workforce survey gets updated quarterly. So you will probably see some changes come June, July already, if there haven't been some changes made already, because the latest release would have been in March or April. The annual workforce survey is interesting because it takes a sample of the population. So it's not like the census where every single individual in the UK is being surveyed. It's a small sample of the population, and then what happens is that the ONS extrapolates the overall numbers for each industry and each group. So for some things, we'll see the changes to the labor market statistics pretty soon. For some things, we won't see them for a very long time. Again, if we want to look at very small areas, if you want to look at, say, just the area where your school is located, you may not see new stats until 2021 when the overall census is made. And this is mostly so that people's privacy is protected. If a data set is too small, if a group of people is too small, NOMIS will automatically anonymize that so that you can't extrapolate specific data about a specific individual from just looking at a data set about job seekers allowance, for example. And that's unfortunate, but it's important to remember that the point of open data is not to infringe on people's privacy. It's to provide us with information for our work and for our transparency. And sometimes that means we will also have to do some extrapolation on our own end to make sure that our data is covered. What else have we got? A lot of it will probably depend on the kinds of questions you're looking to answer as well. So if you are looking to answer very specific questions that's very specific to your school, you may find some data that's more useful than others. Sometimes it's worth remembering that the data that you may want to look for may not be presented as exactly that thing. So to give you an example, if you wanted to know why people are out of work, you may not necessarily find that data, but you can find data about the reasons, the most common reasons people gave for being classed as economically inactive or being classed as unemployed. If you want to know the number of students in your area, those who are classed as economically inactive because of further study, that will be a way to look into that. If you want to know the approximate number of people who may be unemployed because they're looking after home or family, you can absolutely find that in the data set. But what that cluster also represents is a number of people who probably would be interested in volunteering, or people who may be interested in part-time study, or possibly a number of people who have some kind of a side hustle going on, but they don't know how to register it, so they just class themselves as unemployed. Sometimes the answer is not clearly stated in the data. Sometimes you have to think about what data can be collected from the people that you want to study, which can be quite fun if, as a project for your students, if you want to design one of those. But again, that comes down to the kinds of questions you want to ask the data. I'm glad this was helpful. Looks like some people have some ideas about what they would like to do with this and how they want to continue with this. Is there any specific data about, is there any specific question about open data and labor market information that you want me to answer? No questions yet. Okay. Well, again, if you want to get in touch again, if you've got any further questions or comments or concerns, I'm just going to put my email back up on the screen. And unless you've got any further things that you want to discuss at this point, I'm going to wish you a very pleasant day. Thank you for bearing with me, and I will hopefully speak to you soon again.